She was just 15 when they put a crown on her head. 9 days later, they put an axe to her neck. A child who collapsed when they told her she was queen. Her exact words, "The crown belongs to Mary Tudor, not me." This is the story of Lady Jane Grey, England's forgotten queen, a teenager used as a pawn by ambitious men, the same men who abandoned her to die. She could have lived if she just said 3 words, "I am Catholic." Instead, she chose death over lying about her faith. In this video, we'll uncover the true story behind England's shortest reign, a tale of family betrayal, religious warfare, and a teenager who chose death over compromise. And here's what will shock you. The men who put her on the throne were the same ones who abandoned her to die. Hit that like button to help us bring more forgotten stories to light, because Jane Grey's story deserves to be remembered.
Jane Grey wasn't born to be queen. She was born to be a pawn. Imagine England in the 1530s, a country torn between 2 versions of Christianity. Henry VIII had just broken from Rome, creating the Protestant Church of England. Catholic versus Protestant, the old faith against the new. And right in the middle of this religious war, a baby girl was born who would become the ultimate sacrifice. Jane's parents, Henry and Frances Grey, saw their daughter as a ladder to power. While other children played, Jane was forced to study Latin, Greek, and theology. By age 9, she could debate grown men about scripture. But here's the twisted part. Her parents didn't love her mind. They loved what her mind could buy them, and Jane knew it. She once wrote that she found more kindness from strangers than from her own parents. Think about that for a moment. A child so academically gifted that scholars across Europe praised her intelligence, yet so emotionally starved that she preferred the company of her tutors to her own family. But Jane had no idea that this very brilliance would soon make her the perfect target for the most dangerous conspiracy in Tudor England. But there was one person who did appreciate Jane's brilliant mind. Her cousin, King Edward VI, Henry VIII's sickly son who'd inherited the throne at 9 years old. Edward was a true Protestant believer, and in Jane he found a kindred spirit, someone who shared his vision of a Protestant England. Here's where the story gets dark. Edward was dying. At 15, the boy king knew he had months, maybe weeks left, and he faced a terrifying reality. His heir was his half-sister Mary Tudor, a devout Catholic who would undo everything Edward had built. So Edward made a choice that would destroy Jane Grey's life. He changed the succession. Instead of Mary, the crown would go to Jane Grey. Not because she was qualified, not because she wanted it, but because she was Protestant. And because the men around Edward, led by the power-hungry Duke of Northumberland, convinced the dying boy that God wanted it this way. Jane had no idea what was coming. She was 15, newly married to Guilford Dudley, Northumberland's son naturally, and studying her beloved books when they came for her. On July 9th, 1553, they told her King Edward was dead, and then they told her something that would change everything. She was now Queen of England. Jane's reaction tells us everything we need to know about her character. She didn't celebrate, she didn't smile. According to witnesses, she swooned and had to be helped to a chair. When she finally found her voice, she said the crown belonged to Mary Tudor, not hers. But it was too late. The coup was already in motion. They dressed her in royal robes, placed a crown on her head, and locked her in the Tower of London. Yes, locked her in. Because even as queen, Jane Grey was still a prisoner, just a prisoner with a fancier cage. What happened next would prove that sometimes doing the right thing is the most dangerous thing you can do. For 9 days, England had 2 queens. Jane Grey sat in the Tower of London, technically on the throne, but practically under house arrest. Meanwhile, Mary Tudor was gathering an army in the countryside, preparing to claim what she believed was rightfully hers. And here's what makes Jane's story so tragic. She was actually good at being queen. While the Duke of Northumberland expected her to be a puppet, Jane showed an iron will that surprised everyone. When her husband Guilford demanded to be crowned king alongside her, Jane refused. Her exact words were brutal. "I will make him a duke, but never a king." When her advisors tried to manipulate her, she stood firm. She even took personal control of the Tower's keys when she suspected her own supporters might betray her. But being good at the job wasn't enough, because Jane faced an impossible problem. The people of England didn't want her. Think about it from their perspective. Henry VIII's daughter, Mary, was the rightful heir in their eyes. Jane Grey was just a cousin placed on the throne by ambitious men who'd seized power after Edward's death. It didn't matter that Jane was intelligent, principled, or devout. She wasn't legitimate. And Mary Tudor knew exactly how to use that against her. While Jane sat trapped in the Tower, Mary was making the political move of her lifetime. Instead of hiding in some fortress, she rode out to meet the people directly. She assembled an army of common farmers, local landowners, even former enemies who chose to support the rightful heir over the usurper. Here's the moment that sealed Jane's fate. The Royal Navy mutinied. Ships that had been sent to support Jane's government switched sides to Mary instead. Suddenly, Mary wasn't just the popular choice, she was the stronger choice militarily. But the real betrayal was still coming. Jane's own Privy Council, the men who had put her on the throne, started disappearing one by one. Her uncle, the Earl of Arundel, quietly slipped away in the night. Other counselors followed. These weren't men fleeing a sinking ship. These were rats abandoning the captain they'd never actually supported. And Jane knew what was happening. That's why she took control of the Tower's keys herself. She literally locked her remaining supporters inside with her because she'd realized the horrible truth. She couldn't trust anyone. Picture this moment. A 15-year-old girl sitting alone in the Tower of London, holding the keys to her own prison, watching her support dissolve by the hour. She'd been queen for just over a week, and she could already see the end coming. But here's what's remarkable about Jane Grey. She didn't break. Even as reports reached her that Mary's forces were growing stronger, even as her own navy defected, even as her counselors abandoned her, Jane continued to sign documents as Jane the Queen. She wrote desperate letters to landowners, begging for support. She tried to govern a country that had already decided it didn't want her. And through it all, she maintained her Protestant faith. Even when it became clear that her religion was one of the main reasons people rejected her, Jane never wavered. She could have converted to Catholicism, could have tried to win Mary's favor, could have played the religious politics that might have saved her life. But Jane Grey was many things: brilliant, stubborn, principled. What she wasn't was a liar. This refusal to compromise her beliefs would soon become both her greatest strength and her death sentence. Because Mary Tudor was about to show England what happened to a queen who challenged her.
On July 19th, 1553, just 10 days after Jane became queen, her own Privy Council met in secret. They weren't meeting to save her, they were meeting to destroy her. Led by the Earl of Arundel, the same men who had proclaimed Jane queen now gathered to proclaim Mary instead. But here's the thing that makes this betrayal so calculated. They didn't just abandon Jane. They made her the scapegoat for everything. Arundel, speaking for the group, declared that their consciences were burdened with remorse for putting Jane on the throne. He blamed the Duke of Northumberland for manipulating them all. They painted themselves as victims of the Duke's ambition, with Jane as nothing more than an innocent pawn. It was a lie, and they all knew it. But here's the detail that will make your blood boil. These same men had sworn sacred oaths to Jane just days before. They had knelt before her, kissed her hand, and promised to defend her crown with their lives. Now they were literally selling her life to save their own. Jane learned of her abandonment from her own father. Henry Grey entered the room where his daughter sat in royal state and physically removed the cloth of state from above her head. The symbolism was brutal. He was literally uncrowning his own child. Jane's response reveals everything about her character. According to witnesses, she said she would give up the crown as gladly as she had accepted it. Then she asked the question that breaks your heart. "Can I go home now?" She was 15 years old. She'd been queen for 9 days, and she honestly thought she could just go back to her books and her studies as if nothing had happened. But here's what Jane didn't understand yet. There was no going home for deposed queens. Mary Tudor entered London on August 3rd, 1553, dressed in purple velvet and riding a horse trapped with gold. She was every inch the queen the people wanted to see, and one of her first decisions was what to do with Jane Grey. Mary's advisors wanted blood. They argued that Jane was a traitor who needed to die as an example to other would-be usurpers. But Mary chose mercy. She kept Jane imprisoned in the Tower, but suspended her death sentence. This was Jane's chance. All she had to do was keep quiet, show proper submission, and wait for Mary's forgiveness to become permanent. Instead, Jane Grey made the decision that would kill her. She started writing. From her prison in the Tower, Jane penned a series of religious treatises attacking the Catholic Mass that Mary had restored in England. She called Catholic communion a form of satanic cannibalism. She urged Protestants to rise again in Christ's war against Catholic rule. Think about this for a moment. Jane Grey is imprisoned, condemned to death, completely dependent on Mary's mercy for her life. And she chooses this moment to write inflammatory Protestant propaganda calling Mary's religious beliefs satanic. What was she thinking? Maybe she believed she was already dead and wanted to die for something meaningful. Maybe her faith was so strong that compromise felt like damnation. Maybe she was just 15 years old and couldn't see past her own righteousness.
But Jane had no idea that her letters were about to trigger a chain of events that would destroy not just her life, but the lives of everyone she'd ever loved.
But then came the event that sealed her fate forever. In January 1554, Protestant rebels, led by Thomas Wyatt, raised an army to overthrow Mary and put Jane back on the throne. Jane probably knew nothing about it, but among the rebel leaders was her own father, Henry Grey. The same man who had uncrowned her now conspired to crown her again, and this time Mary Tudor would show no mercy. Because Jane Grey alive would always be a symbol, a rallying point for Protestant rebellion, and symbols, Mary had learned, were too dangerous to keep alive. The Wyatt Rebellion collapsed in 4 days. Thomas Wyatt was captured trying to storm London. Jane's father was arrested along with hundreds of other rebels. And suddenly, the girl who had been quietly writing religious letters in the Tower became the most dangerous person in England. Mary signed the death warrants personally. Jane Grey would die. So would her husband, Guilford Dudley. So would her father, who had betrayed Mary's mercy once too often. The executions were set for February 12, 1554. Jane had 5 days to live, and she spent them exactly as you'd expect. Writing. More letters, more religious treatises, more defiant Protestant theology. Even facing death, she wouldn't compromise her beliefs. But in those final days, Jane wrote something that would change how history remembered her forever. And what she wrote will leave you speechless. The night before her execution, Jane wrote a final message in her prayer book, the same book she'd carried to the scaffold. To her father she wrote, "The Lord comfort your grace. Though it had pleased God to take away 2 of your children, yet think not that you have lost them, but trust that we, by leaving this mortal life, have won an immortal life, 2 of your children. She was acknowledging that her father would die too, executed for his role in the Wyatt Rebellion. On the morning of February 12th, they led her husband to his execution on Tower Hill. Guilford Dougie was just 17 years old. After his beheading, they brought his body back past Jane's window in a cart. According to witnesses, Jane showed no emotion, no tears, no breakdown. She simply prepared to follow him. Jane Grey walked to her execution carrying a prayer book and wearing the same dress she'd worn to her trial. The scaffold was private, within the tower walls, not on the public Tower Hill, a privilege reserved for royalty. Even in death, they acknowledged what she'd been. According to the most reliable account, Jane showed the greatest fortitude and godliness. She spoke briefly to the small crowd, acknowledging that she had accepted the crown, but claiming she was innocent of seeking it.
But here's the detail they don't teach in history class. Jane was blindfolded for her execution, as was customary. But when she knelt and felt for the block with her hands, she couldn't find it. For several terrifying seconds, this 15-year-old girl groped blindly on the scaffold, asking, "Where is it? Where is it?" until someone guided her hands to the wooden block. Then she knelt, placed her head on the block, and said her final words, "Lord, into thy hands I commend my spirit." The executioner's axe fell. Jane Grey was dead at 15 after ruling England for exactly 9 days. But wait, there's something about Jane Grey's death that history got wrong for 500 years. Modern historians discovered that Jane's execution was delayed by several hours because Mary Tudor was having second thoughts. The queen who ordered Jane's death spent the morning of the execution pacing her chambers, reportedly asking her advisors, "Is there no other way?" Mary Tudor, the woman history remembers as Bloody Mary, actually hesitated to kill a teenage girl. The real reason Jane died wasn't religious fanaticism, it was cold political calculation. Mary's advisors convinced her that as long as Jane lived, there would always be another rebellion, another attempt to put the Protestant queen back on the throne. Jane Grey died not because she was Protestant, but because she was a symbol. And symbols, in the brutal world of Tudor politics, were too dangerous to leave alive. Today, we remember Jane Grey as the 9 Days Queen, a footnote in Tudor history. But maybe that's wrong. Maybe she was something else entirely. The first woman to prove that queens didn't need kings to rule them. She refused to make her husband a king. She took personal command of her government. She died rather than compromise her beliefs. Lady Jane Grey may have lost her throne, but she never lost herself. And perhaps that's the most royal thing of all. The final twist? Jane's prayer book, the one she carried to her execution, still exists today. You can see it in the British Library. And on the last page she ever wrote, Jane left a message that proves she knew exactly what kind of queen she could have been. If my fault deserves punishment, my youth at least deserves mercy. She was right about both.
This story moved you? Click the next video to keep going. And hit subscribe, because the voices history tried to silence still matter.